everyone. Welcome to our final class before your first graded writing assignment. And what we're going to do today is we're going to finish up with the present perfect. And we're actually going to also move on to look at the past perfect. And you're gonna see that if you understand the present perfect, the past perfect will really be pretty much a piece of cake. So as you can see, the format is going to be different. You can see I'm kind of scrolling around on the computer screen here, and we're going to look at the document. Of course, I mean it's probably obvious. We're going to continue to use the document that we've used, throughout the semester. And if you remember, we kind of really use these kind of pictures, right, in distinguishing between the present perfect simple, right, which was illustrated here, right. And if you remember, in the present perfect simple, we have this interval, right. We have an action happening within a given interval that starts in the past and goes up to the present. And the action, it can be sort of a unique action, or it can happen a finite number of times. It's a punctual action. We don't really think of it as lasting a long time, but it's an action that happens in the past, and any time from the past up until the present. It could be any time there, right? And it has present consequences now, right? So we were looking at things like, I've cut my finger. And when I say I've cut my finger, what I'm saying is it hurts now, right? And that's the present perfect simple. And we noticed, or just the present perfect. When I say present perfect, we can say present perfect simple too. And notice that this very often will correspond with le passé composé in French. Je me suis coupé les doigts, ça c'est un passé composé. Okay? Ou elle a quitté la maison. Si on dit elle a quitté la maison pour savoir qu'elle n'est pas là, we're going to say, oh, she has left the house. D'accord? So that's sort of the the basic way we use the present perfect, or present perfect simple if you prefer, and then we can compare that with the present perfect progressive, right? Notice we have the same interval. We have the past up until the present. Here we have the past up until the present. So it's really important, and that's because that's the similarity with that have plus verb en. It's the have plus verb en in both of the present perfect and the present perfect simple that makes us have that same interval. What's different is with the present perfect, right? Just the not the continuous, right? The simple. We have what we call these punctual actions, right? That are just sort of happening. They don't last, and they're not really presented as sort of occupying any real length of time on the timeline. Whereas here, with the present perfect progressive, we're talking about an action that starts at the beginning of this interval, right, at a given point in the past, and it keeps going, right? And that's why we can call it progressive or continuous. It continues, it progresses. It's either you can think of it as being continuous or progressing, continuously from the beginning, sort of in an uninterrupted way, right, that fills up this whole interval all the way up until the present, right? And that will and this, which is important to note, is unlike the present perfect simple, which we see up here, which corresponds with the passé composé. This type of scenario, when we have the present perfect progressive, it's going to correspond with the present in French, specific use of the present. Whenever we say I'm present with like plus depuis, donc parce que le depuis indique qu'on a ce type d'intervalle, évidemment. And we have to use it, right? So that will be when we say something like je vous attends depuis 5 minutes. And that would be I have been waiting for you for 5 minutes. Okay, so that's the basic distinction. I think we'll leave it at that. So now we're going to move on to sort of subtleties between. We've talked already about this idea of translation, and we're going to move on to this sort of something, sort of a more subtle aspect. And this you will find discussed here, as you can see circled in the sections titled object focus in the present perfect simple and continuous, right? Meaning, we're looking at the difference. And so we're going to look at this sort of subtle aspect, sometimes when it might not be so obvious. So let's come back to what we've just said. And if you remember, when we talk about the present perfect simple, we're talking about a non-durative action. So that's going to mean it's going to, we're talking about the action is going to be finished, right? Then if the action is sort of already finished, right, and we're insisting on the link between the results of that action and now, we're going to use the present perfect, simple. And it's, so that's one thing to be aware of, is with certain kind of actions that have an end, right? And when we indicate that they're already over, we're going to use the present perfect simple. Now, on the other hand, there's other kinds of actions where the end isn't indicated. If I say I've been waiting for you for 30 minutes, notice we're not going to be at the end of this action, right? I'm waiting, and it will sometimes, perhaps it is possible, logically possible, that I've just finished waiting, but the idea is up until now I have been waiting. So this idea of the be plus verb ing, this verb form corresponds with what we call this incompleted action, right? So that means that this thing is sort of going on up until now. Now this means that there's going to be a compatibility when we talk about between the present perfect simple and the types of events that don't last long and then have a clearly marked ending, and those that don't. Right? So for example, we could say something like sleeping, right? Notice sleeping, in theory, I could sleep forever, right? So very often I'm going to say, oh, I have been sleeping for hours, and there's no end indicated in the activity, if that kind of makes sense to you. Notice, by the way, we have an intransitive verb, to sleep, right? I don't sleep someone. That means we just have a subject and a verb. So there's no direct object, and we're talking about something that can kind of go on forever. I have been sleeping, right? Whereas on the other hand, it's here we're very likely to have the kind of events that have an end, right? And what's more, very often that are, once again, we've said that they're not considered, they're not presented as lasting any sort of substantial amount of time on the timeline. But because of that, very often we're going to be talking about events that have an end. So it's just important to keep in mind that there's sort of two different kind of activities. So that the non-ending ones, right, and the ending ones. So that's one idea. So another thing to keep in mind is that there's sort of a third category of events. Think sleeping, no end indicated. In theory, even though it's not true in practice, it could go on forever, right? Whereas we talk about, like, let's say falling down, that doesn't really last. It happens. It's already over, right? It would be really strange to say I've been falling down for 30 minutes, right? Right? That would be really rare. We'd say, oh, he has fallen down. It's already over. And then we have the consequences, right? Okay. So hopefully you have this. You can see this, that this compatibility with non-lasting events with a clearly indicated end for the present perfect simple. Whereas here on the present perfect continuous, we're going to be talking about what we might think of them as being sort of open-ended activities with no clearly defined end. It's in theory we could do them forever, right? C'est comme on dit en français, la mer à boire, like drinking. In theory, you could just drink forever. So you could, I've been drinking for 5 minutes. So with these now, so this is where we have sort of a clear distinction with these sort of lasting events that go up until now and these non-lasting events, right? That what we're talking about now is sort of the result of something that's already been done. So, but there's a third case, and here once again, we're looking at this question of object focus in the present perfect and simple continuous. This third case is all about certain events. We can look at them in different ways. We can either look at them, see them as being sort of non-lasting, or we can look at them as being longer lasting. And what that most often depends on is what is really the complement. So for example, I can say, he's eaten the cake, and then there's none left. Okay, so here's our example. He's eaten the cake, there's none left. Great. So So here, notice our example is eating the cake. And notice if we don't have, if I can kind of cover up, let's say I cover up the cake, just I could say he's been eating. There's sort of no end. Well, maybe compare to that with this example. He's been eating for 10 minutes. Okay, so here we have the same verb, eat, right? Okay, now in the first case we have sort of a finite event with an end, and here we notice it's the complement of the verb eat that makes this a finite process that has an end. Think about it. If in between like eating a cake, it's quite a lot of eating to do, right? But it's still, you can get to the end of it. But if you could say eat, I don't know, a million hamburgers, right? Obviously, a million hamburgers is a very long thing, right? Okay, so that means it's going to take you a long. It can almost become sort of an endless activity, right? So that means it's interesting to note that very often it is the complement of the verb, right, that has something to do with us having either a short sort of non-durative activity, right? Because the complement of the verb really gives us specifications about the activity and also about the end of the activity, right? Whereas here, notice here we're talking about eating. There is no indicated complement, and this is what we call sort of using a verb absolutely. With verbs like eating, we can just say, "Oh, I'm eating," and the complement is not expressed. Obviously, I'm eating a sandwich, or I'm eating, I don't know, a piece of bread, or or something, but we don't necessarily need to indicate that complement, and that means we're kind of and so in this is one way that we can use what we call transitive verbs that have direct objects without direct objects, right? So notice here when we don't have the direct object, this activity, eating, is sort of presented as as a more durative one, right? Because that end doesn't sort of close it off at a given point. Here, when we say he's eating the cake, right? Eating the cake really makes this be a more punctual kind of event, right? Because it has an end, right? And this end occurs before the present. So we're saying this is already done. And here, notice that means we're focused on, the present consequences. Here, we're talking just about this ongoing activity, right? There's no there's no end indicated, and since there's no end indicated, we're sort of imagining this event as continuously going on up until now. Okay, so that's sort of one thing. This idea of an end being indicated, right? It may be. I'm not saying this is absolute. We're going to say may have a tendency to make certain verbs, right, with the presence of an object, be more compatible with, in certain contexts, with a present perfect simple. But this idea of no end being indicated will lead to a greater compatibility with the present perfect continuous. Okay, so that's sort of one example we've seen, and we might want to look at another one. We could say another example where we can show how we can kind of look at something either way, and how the importance of it's very important that the complement of this verb can really change the way we look at the event and make us choose the present perfect simple instead of the present perfect continuous. So to show that, I could say something like you've fixed the car and then the result of that, notice it works perfectly. Okay, so here we have the you've fixed, have fixed, you have a present perfect simple, right? And here's this event, you fixed the car. Notice we're not thinking of this being a very long lasting thing, and it's over. So the thing to note is when this happens, right? So here we have this event fixed. When we have the present perfect simple, right, we have this temporal scenario, which means we have our punctual event and it's over. And what that means is often it's going to be the thing the object that indicates sort of the end of the activity. Because if I'm saying like fixing, I don't know, I could say you're, instead of fixing a car, like you're fixing, I don't know, all the cars in the world, right? Notice if I say all I have to, as soon as the difference between fixing the car that can be punctual, fixing all the cars in the world, you're never going to finish, right? So that means because the car indicates this is the subtle thing, because the car indicates the end of the activity, that is going to be the thing that we're focused on, and that is going to be considered to be the thing affected by the process. So notice, you fix the car, it is the personal pronoun that is, referring to car, anaphorically. It's sort of, on appelle ça la reprise pronominale. It tient lieu de ce groupe nominal, the car. You fix the car works perfectly. So here it's sort of natural when we have a present perfect simple and we have an object that indicates the end of the activity, that we're going to focus on that object. It's a very subtle thing. Here, as I said, we are looking at sort of the most fine-tuning aspects of the present perfect. And once again, this is why we're talking about this question of object focus, right? Okay. By the way, this is also explained in these 3 paragraphs. You can consult that later. So on the other hand, in this case, I could say here, you've been fixing the car. I could say your hands are dirty. Okay, great. So once again, here, you fix the car, that means we're talking about something that's done. Because it's done, right? What we're, in all cases, the present perfect, there's always, as if you remember, just a reminder, when we use the present perfect, we're really focused on the present consequence. So here we have, you fix the car. Present perfect, as we might call, I'm doing sort of French punctuation instead of English punctuation because we don't have a space between before a colon in English, but different from French. So I'm sorry, to come back to this question. Here we have our example. You've fixed the car, right? It's a present perfect. Present perfects, whether they're present perfect simples or present perfect continuouses, right? We're always focusing on, the result, the present, it's mostly a present. As we said, we're usually going to sort of continue using the present. That's a present there. You fix the car, present perfect, it works, present. As we said, last week, we spent a lot of time on this. We're very likely to continue, in our, chain of utterances. We're going to continue with that in the present, right? Because we're really focusing the statement. What we're really talking about is the result. So the idea is, we have this event, fixing the car. It's over. Seeing as the car is kind of associated with the end of the event, it's the one that's affected. So here we're going to have our, car. The car is presently affected. And this is what happens when we have the present perfect simple. Now, here we have, you've been fixing the car, and here we have the present perfect progressive. Now notice we're talking about this activity. You start fixing the car. Here we notice there's no indicated. I could say you have been fixing the car for 30 minutes since this morning. I could do this, but there's no indicator of how long this interval is. But the idea is, at a given point, you started fixing the car. You've been doing this activity, and you've been doing up until now. Now, notice with the present perfect progressive, we're not saying it's over, right? It's really important. Here we're saying it's over. Since it's over, right? The car that indicate the fact that the car that indicates the end of the event will be affected. That's why we're talking about the car here. In this case, right, we're just saying here we're also talking about fixing the car, but here we're talking about the present perfect continuous, right? So this thing is ongoing, and we're not saying it's over. Seeing as we're not saying it's over, the car, which indicates the end of the, it's associated with the end of the activity, will not be affected. So here we're not going to say, notice we're not talking about the car, right? We're talking about our hands. You've been fixing the car. It would be very unnatural to say you've been fixing the car. It is because Notice we're not done, so we're not going to assume that the car is affected in any way. But notice we're still saying that there's a present consequence. When we use the present perfect, whether it be the present perfect simple or continuous, we're insisting on present consequences, but this time we're not going to be focusing on the car that indicates the end of the activity because we're not saying it's over. So that means we're going to be focused on, let's just say something else. Very often it will be the subject, people say, because that's the other thing that's likely to be in the sentence. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the subject, right? I could say, you've been fixing the car, the floor is a mess, or something, right? Or the ground is a mess, right? There is oil everywhere. Present consequences. Once again, present perfect continuous, just like the present perfect simple, we're looking at the present consequences. But with the continuous, we're not saying it's over, so that means it is not going to be the direct object, the thing that indicates the end of the activity, that is going to be affected. It's going to be some other effect. You can think of it as being sort of like a side effect, right? Even though the car is going to be the thing affected by this event, right? The results are not going to be in the car, they're just going to be something else. Usually you can think of it as being an unintentional side effect. It could affect the subject, but it could be something else. Okay, so that is our, that's a tricky thing, right? That's really important, I think, before you, and to be honest, it's, you can, if you find that too confusing, you can kind of ignore it. Make sure, but it's definitely much more important to feel more, know the sort of the basics of using the present perfect and the present perfect simple, but I'm sorry, continuous, that we saw last week, right? The real the common way that we use it. If you only know the common way that you use it, that is excellent. That's fine. I mean, really, it's great if you can use it comfortably. That's excellent. Here we're really fine-tuning, right? We're looking into a fairly subtle case. I do admit that this explanation, might be a little bit long and laborious, but it's sort of, for just to really kind of taking it one step further, right? But if you find this, you're a little bit over your head with just this aspect, it's not that big of a deal. Make sure to go back and review what we saw last week. Just really concentrate on the basics. That's what's more important. And then finally, what we're going to look at is going to be just to say what the just a brief look at sort of the past perfect. So notice the present perfect is a present tense, right? So that means this is our main temporal referent, and we're just really talking about the way things are now. This is a past event, but we're really focused on that present result, right? So we're really talking about the present, right? Now the past perfect is sort of now it's really, I wish I could add it. I'm not very good at, I'm thinking of, I'm going to add something here. Okay. So here I'm going to say, excuse me here, I'm doing my best. This is going to be present. Now this is going to be past. Okay, great. So et si vous comprenez le plus que parfait, ça va simplifier les choses. So sometimes, right, instead of the present being our sort of, I would say, temporal, primary temporal reference, right? Sometimes we can talk about the past, and sometimes we want to talk about stuff happening before in the past. So it's really the same thing that happens with the present perfect. But whereas in the present perfect, we're just talking about have plus verb en means something that happened before the present. We're talking about something that happened. Here's the present, here's the past. Something happened before the past, right? So if I said something like, I want to get rid of this mode. Okay. Oof, I'm still stuck in this mode. I didn't. Oh boy. Okay, I'm gonna stop this here, and I'm gonna go backwards. I don't know how this happened. So I will come back and we will finish. We will continue this. It's actually good to have this in two different videos. We're gonna continue this with the past perfect. Thanks very much.